Welcome back to Danny Rants, and today we have one of the most excitable guests for me. I've been excited to have him on. We've been working on it for like over a year. Finally, the worlds have collided and we have brought him. If you have been in Melbourne, even Australia, even the fucking world, and you talk about hardstyle or rave or hard dance from the 90s or the 2000s onwards, you have to mention this guy's name. So I have across from me, DJ Hellraiser. How are you, my man?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for coming down today.
Oh, you're welcome.
You've been a hard man to capture, but there you are.
Yeah, disorganised half the time. So, yeah, but finally I'm here.
Exactly. So let's wind it back firstly, right? So if anyone who doesn't know who you are, if they've lived behind a rock for the last 30 years, who is DJ Hellraiser?
Complete lunatic, I guess, is the best way to start. DJ from Melbourne, always been Melbourne-based. Was born here. Been doing this for a little over 30 years now. And always been hard music. Like started out in like very, very extreme hardcore. Like I'm talking sort of 250 BPM plus, like which is odd in Melbourne, but somehow people seem to like that, and that continued. And as it went on, I obviously slowed down and sort of, hardcore. Then, it sort of progressed more into sort of the 90s sort of, hard trance, you'd call it back then, which was sort of more acidy stuff like Willie Towell basically was big influence for me.
Yeah, wow.
Like I used to constantly be in Central Station, like bugging him for, the latest acid tracks. And, it was always harder stuff. And for a while, I actually sort of, remember he was getting right into the quite hard stuff. So it was great because he was ordering it for himself and me. So I'd always rock up and, they'd be, 170, 180 BPM still, but went through everything even happy hard, which shocks a lot of people at some point. So, because, very, very cheesy at one point, like lots of vocals, pianos. Very much the polar opposite to what people would think.
Yeah, for sure. So before you were Hellraiser, you were not Hellraiser, you were Anthony. I don't know if you can say your name or not, but can you take us back there? Before you were Hellraiser, like what made you start getting into such hard music? What were your influences in music? And a big thing about you is your style and look, right? So when you came into the scene, you sort of were unapologetically the way you looked. Ravers didn't look gothic realistically. They were like the other way around. They were fluoro, lots of candy, stuff like that. You kind of coined this, the term that I've been told is dark raving. So prior to that, before you become Hellraiser, what begins that journey to get you to where the person that you are, or the character that you are now to this day? Yeah,
well, I guess, starting at the very start, which would be sort of going right back to sort of, when I was probably, I can even say when I was a kid, now late brother and sister, but they were actually my brother was very into sort of, your classic metal rock sound like Kiss and Sabbath and all that kind of thing, and very a lot of the Alice Cooper and that. So these people that put on quite big shows and, a lot of the sort of darker side of things. And at the same time, I was a horror nut as well when I was a kid. But my sister at the time was very into the disco thing and electronic stuff, and that always fascinated me. I loved all the strange sounds and was more attracted to that, I guess, than, sort of the standard, music that was around. Most people were digging the 80s thing at the time, which I cannot stand. It was too cheesy for me. And then when I was around 12, my, kind of consecutively, my uncle and my sister were both sort of going out to, the acid house parties and clubs and stuff that were going on, trying to remember some of the names, like Ivy, places like that, and Checkpoint Charlie and all that kind of thing. And, coming back, obviously I was way too young, but they were bringing back cassettes of what they were listening to and giving me these cassettes of nothing but acid house. And I heard that sound, acid sound, and was just, what is that? And immediately was just locked onto it. And I was just need more of this. How do I get it? And straight away I was I want to, do something with this. I didn't know what. And not long after found out, there were DJs sort of doing a lot of work in this field, and it was getting quite big. And so I went, no, that's what I wanted to do then. And basically
at 13.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So by 14, I had, like a very odd setup. Like it was an old Technics got an SL23, which was like very disco looking, like had dials for like pitch, and like this thing was belt driven. And so I had one of those, a really crappy realistic mixer from Tandy, and like CD Discman, and was mixing like one record into the CD player and then stopping and making these really shitty mixtapes like out of that. And eventually I think, like that's when Cash Converters had just sort of popped up, and I managed to track down another one of these SL23 Technics shitty turntables and finally had my setup, and which was two of those and this realistic mixer and just an old amp. And off I went and like started buying stuff. I was going down, like before I was able to go out to raves or anything, I was going to like Central and things like that and buying whatever I could. I didn't really know the genres or anything, but I was buying, acid and hard stuff, that anything that was basically just grabbing my attention. I didn't know the genres. And so, I was just buying anything that grabbed my attention and taking it home and making these bizarre mixtapes, and that were literally like certain things I didn't even realize I was like playing trance songs on the wrong speed and like mixing them at like 160 odd BPM.
Crazy. And what were you doing with these mixtapes?
At the time, just kind of trying to work out where or what I could do with them, and because I didn't really know anyone or anything, so who I could send these to try and sort of, I guess, go to the next step, whatever that was. I didn't even know that. I didn't even have a DJ name really. I was like, for some reason, using Tony, but like TONEE.
Very 90s.
Yeah, but like a lot of my friends at the time were like, writers and, graph and all that kind of thing. So it was like.
So where did you actually grow up in Melbourne?
Out in Ferntree Gully.
Oh, no shit, really?
Yeah, like right on the border, like Ferntree Gully, right in Knox City Shopping Centre. So I was like always at Knox City, like sort of hanging around there.
That's where Julian Assange comes from.
Yeah, like there and Ringwood, and just sort of like I wasn't really into the writer thing. Like I was just hanging around a lot of people that were. I was obviously sort of trying to get in, and then like eventually found a couple of people that went to raves. I'm like, oh wow, like and basically just invited myself. I'm like, nothing's stopping me. I'm like, I want to go to one of these things, and managed to convince parents. I'm like, oh, I'm going to be staying at a friend's house, that kind of thing. Like, and so suddenly, I'd started going to raves, which every picture tells a story, like most people, and hardware, and like all those kind of things were, and a lot of stuff at the Palace, oddly, even though I was way underage and really, I looked even younger, like I probably looked about 10 years old. Somehow, like at the start, I was just getting in, they didn't really care. But then I think it was a year in, funnily enough, I was like, this brief period where I was like doing basketball at high school, and my basketball coach was one of the security guards, and he's like, oh yeah, fuck it, come in, like as long as you don't get messed up or anything. And like, I'm walking out at 3 a.m, like, I'm fine. What's like, but basically, he was letting me into everything sort of there, and he was like doing security at a lot of other places. And
so every picture tells a story. Were they out west originally?
Well, the first one I went to was at a place called TVU Warehouse, which was out in Footscray, which is kind of where their home base was for a long time with Global Village and that kind of thing. But TVU was near there, but just this sort of, I guess, disused factory, like warehouse space, and they were just taking over that every now and again, and just absolutely mind-blowing parties like they were. There's no way to really explain what these parties were like to somebody that wasn't going out in the early 90s. It was just, like, because I've seen even things, I think it was Mixmag, where like it had, the world's in the 90s, like most notorious sort of rave scenes. And I think we clocked in at number 5.
Yeah, Melbourne.
Like having the most like mind-blowing sort of underground scene. And it really was like, I was, to me at the time, it was just that's what raves were. But, in hindsight, it was like, oh, we really had something special going on here.
Felt properly underground. And this was like the explosion of ecstasy too. So it was like everybody was like, it was more people coming from in everywhere. It was a love generation. It was like the beginning of something that we still fucking do today,
Yeah, well, like it wasn't, sort of like overseas, you'd hear, about the scenes over there, like, because, it wasn't like now where you've got the internet and all that kind of thing and you can just look up, what's going on in 2 seconds. You had to like really dig at what's going on overseas, try and find flyers, or like I was doing, like I'm literally looking at records. One of the big influences for me was Lenny D back in the very early days, and I was like early Industrial Strength, which is his label, looking at the records and grabbing the number off that and literally just calling it and just going, what's going on over there, trying to sort of connect myself to these people, even though they're like, probably who the hell is this, little kid bringing us up? But I didn't care. I was sort of, like nothing was stopping me. I was just, and then, I remember I was, 16 and listening to, like, because I listened to, like most people, Kate Bathgate, very well-known name back then, did a show called Beat in the Street, or, then it changed its name to Transmission. But this was on Triple R. She basically had sort of the core show that everybody listened to. That's what you listen to find out when, what raves were on, who was coming out here, Willie Tell and Richie and Jeff Tyler and like all the names, like all playing, the latest tunes and all that kind of thing. And I flicked to I can't even remember the station, like, random just community radio, and there was somebody playing hardcore, and I was like, oh, this is the stuff I play. So I was like paying attention and like thought, fuck it, like I'll just call up and kind of invite myself. Like, so I rang up and said, oh, this is the music I play. Do you want to DJ? Like, which is very weird. It's not what people would normally do, but I just kind of invite, and like oddly he said yes. And it was this guy called Speedball, and what I now know is that was Honey Smack in his very early iteration.
No shit, really? Yeah. Honey Smack was Speedball. I was about to say, what a fucking sick name. How good's Honey Smack too?
And he was playing, like 180 BPM odd, like really heavy banging sort of, at the time people were calling it gabber, and, lots of variations of the same, basically just really fucking intense hardcore. But yeah, like, so I just kind of invited myself and he went, yep. And so I rocked up, bit nervous, but I'm like, I just want to play my music, because that was sort of what I kind of wanted to do when I first started. It was like more going out, and, Melbourne was, synonymous with, Detroit stuff, like Detroit techno and German trance and all this. And I loved it. Like, I've got tons of it, like absolutely. Yeah, I love it myself. But very few people catered for the hardcore sound. Like, it wasn't a Melbourne thing. Like, there was.
Where did it come from originally, the hardcore sound? Because obviously I know you talk about, Richie Rich, Willie Tell, you talk about those guys. They're synonymous with techno, Detroit, Chicago, whatever. And then there's this sort of, I'm guessing like mid-90s or early 90s or towards the end of like 95, it blows up into this way faster BPM, hardstyle, hard dance. Like when and where did that come from in Melbourne?
In the, like, even like the early 90s, it was around, and stuff was getting played. Like, certain DJs were just known for, they weren't hardcore DJs, but they were dropping bits and pieces of it in their sets. Just like one of the places I went again when I was underage was Hellfire, and that was on Sunday night. So you had all the bondage and shit downstairs, but upstairs was just this banging techno club, and it was everything, trance, but mainly acid, techno, and hardcore got played. And it was like Andrew Till and guys like that were just popping bits and pieces of it. Like mid-set, you'd suddenly the set would go absolutely bonkers and like, you know, it would hit, you know, 180 BPM, but it was, again, this sort of different sound than what you'd hear, you know, I guess from Holland or, you know, that was sort of like the more straightforward, you know, hardcore that Thunderdome and all that were pushing, like, because at this time everyone knew Thunderdome. They were like in all the CD stores and that kind of thing. But this stuff was like really underground, sort of, you know, either US hardcore or German hardcore or whatever. And it was, you know, white labels or, you know, labels that are now long gone. Like, but it was either those guys or the core people that were sort of pushing it were Rude Boy, H2O, like Terrence Ho. Liz Miller was also part of it. And one of my biggest influences was Mad Rod, who was just tempo-wise, like extreme, like fast. Like he was literally playing hardcore on the wrong speed, so it was even faster. So if you like clocking, I remember this party called Alien 2, and it was on the second floor. It was, like promised 250 BPM plus all night, and it wasn't joking. It literally at points it was hitting 400-500 BPM, and like it was just bonkers. But
You would have had to have some good drugs to fucking keep up in that room.
I was like, you know, wasn't sober, obviously. I was like, yeah, tripping. And I walked up and just heard this because I'd never, you know, I was into my sort of, you know, I guess like 180, you know, sort of standard Dutch stuff and that kind of thing, and walked in and heard this, and I'm like, whoa, like this is intense. Like, what is it? And because of the state I was in, I just fixated and like ended up, you know, sitting there like in a little ball, like next to the stack of speakers, just feeling the bass go through me, and it was just like unlike anything I'd heard before. And like, you know, they had like, you know, your standard trance and Richie and all that playing downstairs, but I'd been in this room all night and all my friends had been, you know, with the trance and all that. And so when we all walked out in the morning, they're all talking about how good this set, and I'm just like, nah, this stuff that was upstairs, I didn't know what it was. I'm just like, these DJs, I'm like, I need more of this. Like, and I was just fixated. Like, so from that moment onward, that was it. Like, it was, you know, artists like Speed Freak was one that was like big. Like, I love that guy, which he's still actually around to this day. But it was like
baptism of fire almost.
Pretty much, yeah. Like,
so is that when your trajectory changes into, I guess, DJ Hellraiser?
Yeah, well, because I'd been buying this stuff, and then I sort of, it all kind of happened within, oddly, a period of weeks. I was then playing this stuff. I'd managed to go to the store that Rude Boy and that owned at the time was Octave Records in Greville Street in Windsor, and it was like that was, you know, they had the really underground stuff, like, you know, just obscure white labels, and I don't even know how they were getting this stuff, like, because now, you know, because of things like Discogs and that, like it's obscure. It's worth a fortune now because it was only ever, you know, say 100 copies made or even less. Like some things I've got like those 10 copies, that was it. Like
crazy.
Yeah, just absolute underground, like extreme stuff. But that's when I'd been on this show. I invited myself onto this show, and just I remember he did the sort of, you know, interview beforehand, like before I did the set, and he's like, oh, you know, so we've got DJ, and he'd never asked, and I actually hadn't thought about it, so I was like, oh shit, like, and I thought I can't really go with Tony, like, because I hated calling myself, you know, because my name was Anthony, so I was like, it doesn't even work. I'm like, and sort of all within a split second, like it felt like, you know, almost an eternity at the time, but it was within like literally a split second. I'm like, all right, I listened to guys like, you know, DJ Paul and the Dark Raver and the Night Raver and all these names that sounded sort of, I guess, larger than life and just kind of out there. And I'm like, just thought to myself, what's your favourite movie? Oddly enough. And Hellraiser sprung to mind because I was fascinated. I love that movie. And I just went, DJ Hellraiser, and thought, well, that works. So I just kind of stuck with that at the time, and no thought was put into it whatsoever. Like people always expect there to be this big story behind it, but no, it was literally just put on the spot, and I had no idea. So that sprung out, and then
I love it. It's like meant to happen.
yeah, like it just seemed fitting. Like because I thought like when I got home I was like dark raver, night raver, Hellraiser.
So that the fashion sense stuff, does that come after, or was it beforehand? Were you always sort of like, you talk about dark raver, night raver, you talk about your sort of like a fashion, I guess, is what you would call as a dark raver, but for people that don't understand rave, it's probably gothic, like a goth.
Yeah. Well,
were you doing that beforehand, or was it kind of after?
That come a little bit after. I was very interested in it, but sort of everybody that went out, it was all very, it wasn't quite sort of, what it hit, 2000 around that era where it was, fat pants and, as many fluoro colors as possible and candy and all this stuff. Like it was all DIY, like, at the time, like, there were brands like Renegade and that, which were very small, but they were sort of just popping up, and Custard Shop and all these other sort of like small sort of brands like
Ministry style.
Yeah, but it wasn't, fat pants at the time. It was just, baggy jeans or, some colourful people. A lot of people were just making their own stuff at home. And, I remember one guy had these like sort of baggy jeans, and just down the side had like, it looked like an eye chart, but it was just E's in all different directions, and it got bigger and bigger, and it was stuff like that, just people coming up with wacky ideas and just making their own sort of, like, I guess, abstract wear, like just stuff that didn't fit in anywhere else and, worked for techno or raves. And, even I had that, like lots of tops, like T-shirts with drug references. Like, I remember lots of stuff with like that looked like medication packets, but instead of, I remember there was one that was like, I've still got them actually, like one that looked like Coca-Cola, but instead it's cocaine. And, another one I've got that, like, they were random ads, like some of them weren't drug reference, they were just in your face sort of thing. Like one that I've got, I love, and it's worth a fortune. So I like try not to touch it and just keep it aside in like the condition because it's about to fall apart. But it's the McDonald's logo, but it just says motherfucker. Like, and I love that. Like I was wearing that up until, about 2003. Like all this stuff that I had back then still actually fits me, oddly enough.
So your first gigs is DJ Hellraiser, right? So you play that gig at the radio. That's your first opportunity as DJ Hellraiser. That's when the entity is born.
Yep.
Then your first gigs from there is like, how do you then start playing in clubs?
That was, it was quite odd because I was like, how do I go from here? And while I'm actually playing on this show, call comes through and it's for me and they want to speak to me. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. I don't know what it's about, but I'll speak to them. And it was this guy, Berserker, or Luke, and he just started out and he wanted to do hardcore as well. And it took me a while, not too long, but I eventually, managed to get gigs at things like at Every Picture and things like that, and these sort of underground things that I'd been going to that I'd wanted to play at and just didn't know how. I was very shy, like in the sense of, didn't really want to push myself like too hard in people.
I feel like anyone who's met you would know you're shy, right? Like, so we have a mutual friend, which I met you fucking 15 years ago probably, but you were super shy. But I used to watch you out, and anyone who's seen you on stage and then met you in person, it's like blaringly complete opposites. Like you're a very introverted, quiet guy, but on stage you are the complete fucking opposite of that.
Yeah, well, I actually had it explained quite well from a friend, like, because I'd never really thought about it. I would just, kind of roll with it. But a friend of mine goes, there's like, I guess, two versions of you. He goes, there's like Anthony, which is, because I was like living with this person. They're like, that's just you, quiet, you're into your music. It's sort of, all we do is, just music. And, obviously horror was a big thing of mine and metal as well, like, which took a while for me to actually get into. But, and then there was Hellraiser, who was behind the decks. And I was like, it's a bit weirdly egotistical or something to me. I've always been a bit funny about that, but it kind of made sense because I didn't quite understand what it was or what changed, but I knew that something was different, like because I was, suddenly the opposite sort of person. And that kind of made sense the way they described it. I'm like, oh, yeah, it's like a bit of a split personality or something, like, which I went, oh, yeah, that works. It goes in with the rest of my crazy. Like,
so what do you think that happens? Like you just get there and it's just the love of the music, and then they're projecting it back to you. Like, what do you think is that major shift?
It's that energy, like, because that's sort of still to this day to me. It's like a lot of people, they're talking about, the professionalism, blah, 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 whereas to me, load of crap. Like, to me, it's all about the passion. Like, if you don't have passion, then what's the point of doing it, really? To me, it was that. And so I would get up there and never, ever plan sets, never. Like, I would maybe have an idea of what I might be starting with. And even most of the time, I'd go, I'm going to start with this, and that would go out the window the minute I'd jump on. Like, it'd be, they'd get in. I think they're going to get into this. Like, so I would just grab that tune out and start from there. And immediately I'd feel this sort of energy from the crowd, like, and see who's dancing, and immediately I'd feed off that, like, and that would give me, I guess, this buzz. And so straight away that would make me go crazy, like get really energetic. And like one of my big things I still do is like I fist punch into the air, like while I'm playing. It's like, like fisting is a lot, but is a big thing. Like we all used to go, I'm like gone fisting. Like I even had a T-shirt at one point with a like fishing sign that had gone fisting, and I used to wear that everywhere. Like, but it was like I'd start doing that and just going completely bonkers behind the decks, like jumping around and just I did not stop moving, and that was sort of the crowd would, I guess, feed off that. And so they'd go more crazy. And so then I'd feed it, and there was this back and forth exchange of energy.
Perfect storm.
And that's what I've always thrived off, is this energy exchange that went on between the crowd and myself. And
it's funny because unless you've been on a stage, even if you're watching like from side of stage, you can't understand it. But anyone who's been in the industry or been in the scene, it's 1,000,000% your mood is derived and sucked out of you. There's something that you gain. And we talked about ADHD people before the podcast started, being addicted to this sort of music and the scene and the lights. But like I'm saying, like it doesn't matter what it is. I suck it up and I feel like I fucking eat it. Like it's almost like Soul Eater, like one of those creatures from Harry Potter. Yeah. And I suck out their energy, and I can be sober, on drugs, drinking or whatever.
It really is like that. You've nailed it. It's like those, like soul eating creatures, like, just this vibe thing. That,
you're stealing off them. Like,
and then like the minute I do that, then I'd be throwing it back at them, and it would just continue on, and it'd get more and more full on to just this like massive storm of it going on. And that's where I sort of started doing, like, because at the time most people, their sets would do this journey, it would go up, get hard, and then it would come back down and chill out. Whereas my sets, and it's something I got known for, was it would go up, 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 and then I'd just go, all right, what could absolutely annihilate them at the end? Like there was no going back down. It was just, what can I do? Like, how can I blow them away? Because to me, it was like, I guess like a roller coaster, but one that, had this spectacular fucking crash at the end or whatever.
Big
like
fireworks.
Yeah, like, so it would be like, up, 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 and then kaboom, like, and that's where sort of one track that I think I probably played, it started at Pharmacy, but now I've probably played it, honestly, I reckon, to the thousands of times at the end of my set, which is Neophyte Drugs, which has got this sort of Marilyn Manson speech and all that. And that's how that sort of come to be. It was just like, this thing's hard and, it works perfectly. It's got, Marilyn Manson talking, but in a way that I can sort of utilize it myself and walk around and, do a bit of a show for the crowd. And like, so that becomes sort of the ending track for my sets. Like everywhere I go, people, can you play drugs? Can you play drugs? Can you play? And so that becomes, but then it started working with Brad from Pharmacy. It was like one of the tracks that at first it was, but the first time I played it, it was like playing at Sunshine People. And it was this 3-hour set that I'd done because Nick and Amber were meant to play 2 hours after me and something happened at the airport, so they couldn't get there. And
so it's Nick Fish and Amber Savage, yeah?
And so I ended up, because they couldn't get to the gig, I ended up playing this, and I was happy about it because I got to play this like 3-hour set finishing Sunshine People, which is like just epic. But it was like, all right, people just won't stop. You know, every time you try and get to that point, to be one more. Like, as you know, everything you play is one more. And like Brad's like, oh, how the fuck can we get them out? Like, because we've got to shut this thing. And I'm like, I know what will do it. And looked down and I had Aphex Twin, Come to Daddy.
What a tune.
Yeah. And I thought, this will clear it out. It has to. Played it and people went absolutely bonkers. Like, and I'm just like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, I couldn't believe that people were going nuts to this thing. And like, Brad, massive fan of it as well. He's like, this is sick. Right? And I'm loving it because, you know, as you said, crazy tune.
So when you talk about Brad and you, right, there's Brad Drummond who's killed Rockstar Entertainment. Yep. I'm not sure if that's what it was called back then.
Yeah.
There's Pharmacy, but like there's a lot of people who, when they think of Pharmacy, they think of Hellraiser. Like there's two, they're one in the same sentence in a sense.
Yeah.
Can you explain to me like where that comes together? Because a lot of people said that, you know, he had a little bit of a dark twist of mind when he was coming up with Pharmacy. I've not yet been able to speak to him, but no doubt I will. And then you guys came together and it was a perfect storm. And from what I've been told, there was, you know, you were carried out in a coffin at one point. There was people getting hung up and meat hooks at different bits. And I heard there was one time a DJ where the DJ was like, if these shows keep going on, like this sort of gory stuff, I'm going to fucking turn the music off. So can you explain to me like how that came together and like how far it went and maybe one of the best stories you've got from Pharmacy?
Yeah, well, sort of what had happened is like, you know, I was playing in the 90s, got to about 97, 98 and I'd become a bit, I guess, jaded with the scene. Like minimal techno had kind of taken over Melbourne and I wasn't into it. Like it's just everything I went to, it was same tracks, same sound, like it sounded like the same sets over and over again. I was just like, you know, 130 BPM, dog, like nothing else, maybe a cowbell here and there. Like, yeah, that old thing. And I just went, I can't get into this. Like, so just party after party after party, it was just the same thing and I was getting really jaded. So sort of on the side, I'd started getting into metal quite a bit and I'd never really been into it, but got shown Tool, which like immediately the visual side of that like was just like, whoa, this is, you know, really different. Like, because, you know, before that I'd heard, you know, Pearl Jam and all this sort of Seattle stuff and it just wasn't really my thing, like because it was just bands playing. I didn't mind the music, but
wasn't fast enough.
Well, there just was something missing from it. And immediately, as soon as and then someone showed me Marilyn Manson. And it sort of clicked with me as well. It made a connection back to David Bowie, who I was really into. Sort of, you know, the two different coloured eyes, all that kind of thing. There were a lot of similarities with me between those two. And one of them was, as well, the other person is Alice Cooper, was the show. That they weren't just playing music. They were performing it and they were going all out, doing as much as they could do to not just play music for the crowd, but to put on this crazy show. And like, you know, he would go to the extremes, like, you know, levels that even I think were a bit nuts, like, you know, cutting himself and all that kind of thing. But all of it was in order to entertain. And like, you know, he was willing to put himself through pain and all kinds of, but it was all in the name of entertainment, like, because, you know, shock rock had been around. He wasn't the first. Alice Cooper had definitely done it, you know, but Marilyn Manson popped up and, you know, obviously in that time it took a lot more to shock the shit out of people. So he went, all right, I'm up for doing that, and just started really pushing the bar, like, and yeah, I saw this and I'm like, I'm liking the music, but I'm loving what he's doing. Like, I'm loving this sort of, you know,
showmanship.
Like, yeah, just willing to do anything and everything to really just put on a show for people and make it an experience. So for like, that, this set, say it's an hour and a half or 2 hours. For that hour and a half or 2 hours, you were getting like, not just, it was like Kiss basically returning, like these mammoth shows, and like you'd walk out just going, whoa, what was that? Like, and there were a few other bands popping up that were also doing it, Rammstein, and it's sort of all at the same time, this industrial type.
Slipknot, Mudvayne, all those sort of things.
Yeah, like new metal or industrial metal or whatever people, but they were doing shows, and they were these really crazy shows, and I'd been off sort of, not seriously, but I've been like fuddling around playing with a band and seeing if I could go in that direction maybe, and I was doing like the vocal side of things a little bit, and because that always fascinated me. And then suddenly out of nowhere I got this contact, and I think it was actually Nexus, like Hamish, that Brad had asked, how do I get in contact with this guy Hellraiser? And Hamish was like, oh, I know him, I can put you in contact with him.
It might sound weird to people, but this is how you used to connect with people. You used to have to ask people for people's phone numbers and catch up and have a meeting. You couldn't just hit them up on Instagram or Facebook back. Yeah. And it could take ages. Like if you were putting a lineup together, it could take weeks. Yeah. Because you'd have to fucking get someone's phone number, call them, get them at the right time. Even landlines. I remember booking people through landlines back in the day.
Well, that's the odd thing. And like, I remember, getting this call like at home, like, I was living at my parents' at the time still. And like I'd phone in my bedroom and, picked it up, and it's, this guy, Brad, and he's like talking about this party pharmacy, and I was like, sounds kind of cool. Yeah, why not? I'll give it I was still in my jaded sort of mindset. So I was like, I'll give it a try, but, I'm not sure where it'll go. Like, because I was sort of, as I said, jaded. So I was like, nothing's going to sort of eventuate to much. Like I was, just basically very jaded at the time. And so I rocked up to this party, and as soon as I saw him, I'm like, recognised him, and it had been from Big Day Out that had been previously with Marilyn Manson playing, and this guy had basically stage dived off the fence and nearly took my eye out with a bloody wristband, like with like spikes on it. And I'm like, I remember you. And that's the first, and like, but sort of this oddly, that's, as they say, like very small world, like, so I'd already sort of, I guess, in a weird way, met this guy that jumped on, played my set, and this is sort of before it had its full-on direction. Like it was a party, it was a bit different, and I was playing, a little bit all over the place, like because I didn't even really know what sound I wanted to play, like because hard house had started coming in at this time, but I wasn't, the bouncy sort of hard house wasn't really my thing. But there was Tin Rib, which was like crazy acidy sort of stuff. It was faster. And then I still had the hardcore that I was into. So I was sort of blending that together, and it seemed to work at the time. And there was also, I had a few releases on this label, and to me it was just like banging acid stuff, but it was this label, Trance, and people went nuts to it. And I'm like, okay, people like it. I'm like, didn't realise that, this label was going to be, the basis for pretty much hard trance as of going on there, and it got to, just massive levels. But to me it was just acid. Like, I'm like, yeah, cool acid tracks. Like, so I'd played that, and so he invited me back. And by this point, we'd been speaking a bit more on the phone, and he'd been sort of, I guess brainstorming on sort of where to take the parties from there. And Tracid Tracks had started growing, and there was this track that it was on one of those CDs that everybody bought. I think it was D Trance or D Techno, one of those things. And it was Aces, Acid Nightmare. And it had just come out. Like, nobody had really heard it, but it was like Nightmare on Elm Street, crossed with acid, hard trance, like, and it was just perfect. Like, and straight away he's like, oh, I'm going to get this guy. Like, we didn't even really know how to pronounce it, let alone who he was, anything like. So, like, you know, I think I was calling him Assis at the time, and like, yeah. So basically, ended up he'd booked him, and party was called Acid Nightmare, obviously, because we didn't really, other than there was another track that had got previously really big, and I'm like, that was my favorite track by him at the time was Acid Headcracker, which was just flat out acid. And so he'd booked this guy, brought him out, and like, yeah, we'd found out like that basically he'd barely DJ'd at the time. Like, he, you know, made music, but he wasn't really, I think it was like his fourth or fifth set. Like, but we'd like pulled this guy overseas, and yeah, Brad had him like playing at this big party, and like the turnout was massive because this track had just come out. Everybody, you know, through where I worked, oddly enough at the time, Sanity Music, I was at Dance Arena working there, and yeah, people had gone nuts on this track, and that it hadn't really got played out yet. It was still kind of at that point where people were still yet to play it a lot, like, because, you know, that was at the period where people would literally fight over tracks, and, you know, there was
of course, yeah. I've gone through that in this podcast in depth, yeah.
Yeah, like, well, one of the big ones, you know, that was like fought over, and, you know, was Thunder in Paradise, which most people know just from that name, but it was the Scott Project version of it. And yeah, I think it was Jason and Scott and a few other, like, were all sort of pretty intense over who got to, you know, who busted that track, basically, who was the first to play it.
Yeah.
Whereas I was just focusing on, you know, like Aces and all these other sort of darker, acidy, like, and what I'd done is, like, before the party, I went, well, fuck it. Like, you know, I'd been doing this band thing and got right into sort of the look and all that kind of thing, and went, I want to pull that into what I'm doing as a DJ. It was really fucking weird, like, just to even think of that. I'm like, because I was so jaded at the time, I'm like, it's either going to work for me or it's just going to kill me either way. I couldn't give a shit. Like, you know, I had nothing to lose, basically, so I went, yeah, I'm going to do it. Like, and so, yeah, I like turned up, and I think I was there, like, full suit and the contact lens and black makeup, like, and yeah, basically looked pretty similar to, I guess, like the cover of Antichrist Superstar by Marilyn Manson. And yeah, people, it was odd to people, but it seemed to work. Like, so I was like, okay, cool. Like, and then it was like, kind of, where can I take this next? And at the same time, Pharmacy as a party was kind of starting to put on shows, and, you know, as you said, like, it ended up with some pretty crazy stuff going on. But like, at first it was just, you know, some pretty basic stuff. Like, one of the things I did was, it was advertised I was going to have my own visuals, and what I'd done is basically gone through, you know, Tool video clips and just horror and all kinds of random crap, and with VHS tapes, like, I had the 2 VHS recorders, like, and I was like splicing together, like, I guess, my own visuals out of bits and pieces of all this other weird shit, like, just, and I'm like thinking, oh, what's going to really fuck with people's heads, like, while I'm playing, and like, so that was on the screen. I'd completely forgotten that I even had done it, well, you know, because when I'm playing, I'm kind of in the zone, and yeah. So what
you guys did, so what Brad and you guys did was basically put like horror, you know, like heavy metal and hardstyle in together, and like, still to this day, those things work so fucking perfectly together. You guys create that. Pharmacy blows up around Melbourne, and it becomes like this new wave of dark ravers that you sort of hero, and you play all these gigs all over fucking Australia, and then you go overseas. I think you played Q1, is that right?
Yeah, well, my first overseas gig was actually like, I was playing, I think it was like a Pharmacy versus Hard Candy or something like that. They used to do a lot of those. And it was, I think it was Proteus. Yeah, it was. And it was the first time he'd come out here. And like, as soon as I saw him, I'm like, this guy's awesome. Like, you know, the image, everything. Like, and when I got there, it was quite funny because like I had one of his records and like I've gone over, you know, because I'm still a fanboy no matter how much I play. I'm like, can you sign my record? And like straight away he's grabbed out, I'd just done a record for Tracks, and he'd grabbed that out and he's like, oh, can you sign mine? And I'm like, this is very weird.
That's fucking sick.
Like, and so at the same time we're sort of exchanging records to sign, and I just played my set and, you know, did my thing, like, which was, you know, I was doing like the image and all that kind of thing, and the show. And after my set, his manager, which was Lab 4's manager, which Adam from Lab 4 was actually his wife at the time, come up and said, oh, you know, would you want to support Lab 4 and Proteus around Australia? I'm like, I would love to. Like, you know, who's going to turn that down, basically? Like, so I did that. I think it was like Sydney, Melbourne, and Adelaide. And then in Adelaide, she's come over and she's asked me, how would you feel about coming over to the UK and playing, we do these parties called Laboratory, and it's sort of, you know, based around Lab 4, but we have, you know, Yogi and Proteus and all these guys. So basically the thing that she said, and it was like UK first gig, she's like, Brixton Academy. And I'm like, what? Like, you know, and because I'd heard of, you know, prestigious venue, like unlike anything, you know, all these bands I'd been watching, it was always, you know, such and such live at Brixton, like, and I'd heard, and I was like, are you serious? Like, so straight away, obviously, you know, I'm not going to say no to that. Like, opportunity was knocking and I went, fuck yeah. Like, that got over there and yeah, I'd like basically played this. I was like, just, yeah, I was so nervous that I was like, literally, I threw up before my set. Like, yeah, I was shaking like a leaf, like, but got it there, did it, had, and it, like, it still sits there as one of the best sets I've ever done. Like, just that venue, the vibe that was there, because it was playing with Yogi at the time. Like, it was James Moss, but it was Sterling Moss, who, you know, now massive in the acid techno scene, and that's sort of where I like work a lot. And Mark E.G. and just basically everybody that was like huge in the UK and all crazy as well. Like, it was sort of like, felt like I was home in the sense like that all these DJs that were just as nuts as me.
Yeah, that's the best.
And that's, she goes, oh, like, and that's where it sort of moved on to the next stage. It was like, oh, do you want to, you know, do more work for us? And she goes, I'll be your international manager. And I was like, what? Like, because none of the, I was just like, how is this happening? It just was very surreal. I was like, I'm not going to say no, but I was trying to absorb it all. And so obviously, yes. And her organisation, like, well, management was called Queen of Clubs, which was perfect. She had the playing card with the Queen of Clubs and just, yeah, it worked perfectly. And it was like me, obviously Lab 4, that was, you know, because it was her husband, but also her core sort of act. Proteus, who'd just won, he'd been in the DJ Mag Top 100, which, like, he even gave me a mention in that, which I was just blown away. I'm like, because to me that was as close as I was ever getting, you know, like, because it was very commercialised, you know, hard music, especially on that level, did not make it into the DJ Mag. But suddenly, you know, my name's mentioned by I'm like, whoa.
So cool, man.
Like, and suddenly I remember she called it her little group of lovable freaks is what she called it. And it was great, like, because, you know, we were playing, I remember I got to play for Proteus at a place called Sade in Finland, which was like basically, yeah, just this crazy, in Helsinki, this club that was just dark, hard, heavy. Everybody was like Proteus, so it was all, you know, freakish sort of people, like, dressed up, and yeah, got to do that. And I'm like, I'm in on Halloween, I'm in Finland playing this like crazy, like, I'm just like, that's the best, like, blown away by it. And then, suddenly started getting involved. Like hardstyle had been picking up, but at the time it was the early stuff, which was, I guess, just like, to me, it was like the hard trance that had been around, but just a more intense, dark
grungy
version of it. Like, and I was like fixated.
So your label stuff, right? Because we're actually coming up on an hour and I feel like we need to continue this conversation. So I think this is part 1, Hellraiser. And this is, we just literally took us now. Totally, man. It's so
and
depth.
I also don't shut up. So,
but it's like we got to how you become Hellraiser. We start the pharmacy journey. You going overseas, playing with guys like, Lab 4, and you said Proteus and stuff like that. The journey continues and it gets more crazy. You've got a record label. There's a new release that has just come out. Your latest release. We're actually going to be giving one of these away. So watch out for that, like how we do it and how we activate it. You've also got your label, which is called?
Tension Music, which is sort of like, oddly, I was starting to get into this label called Flat Life Records on the internet, and I was like obsessed with this stuff. Like every release that was coming out, I was just like, oh, that's crazy. So ended up like, I'm like, same thing, just messaged the guy that ran it. And I'm like, probably going to think I'm a complete weirdo or whatever, but like started speaking to him a bit. His name's Jack Wax. And speaking to him more and more, and like at first it was because there was like this old record on his label that was no longer available, and I'm like, oh, is there any way I can get a copy? And like, so it sort of started there, and next thing I knew, like I think it was within the next year, talking to him about doing a label on that, and he's like, oh, what would you do? Like, and so I mentioned like, and I'd had a few names in mind, but Tension was one because it had a lot to do with, I've dealt with like pretty bad anxiety and panic disorder and stuff in my own life. And so it was a little bit that. And also the other thing that I wanted to kind of push was, when you're playing a track or you hear a track out and it's, as it's building up just before that drop, like before it kicks back in, you've got that like tension there that you're feeling. It's like a good tension, and it's like, you feel the goosebumps. And it's a type of tension, but it's a good tension. And to me, that's what I sort of...
That represents the whole fucking feeling and what you feel you're about.
Yeah.
Where do people find it if they want to find it?
Online, through Bandcamp is one of the best places. But now he actually works for one of the biggest distribution places in pretty much the world, Triple Vision Distribution in Holland. They do everything, and he works as doing the releases there, but also runs what's called the Flat Life label group, and it's honestly like 50, 60 odd labels underneath.
So sick.
Jungle, acid techno, psytrance, goa, like everything pretty much. Like, but yeah, my thing was obviously like banging hard, dark.
The Hellraiser.
Yeah. And like acid, obviously, because that was one of my, it's always been a core sound through everything. But yeah.
Go check it out, listen to the releases and get onto the new one. So I'll put that in the comments below. I'll put links to the label and I'll put links to the latest song. And as I said, we're giving it away. So this is to be continued. Danny Rance, Hellraiser, V2 coming soon for part 2 of the Hellraiser journey.
Thank you very much.
You're a legend, man. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Legend.